Hello friends and subscribers, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Daniel Rosel here, bringing you a periodically updated video diary about my various discoveries in the world of technology. I'm sorry that it's not as regularly updated as I kind of planned when I set out this channel and when I started YouTubing. In general, my life has kind of evolved and changed over the past few years, as all of our lives have, and I just haven't really had so much time. But I do maintain this channel and occasionally drop in when I feel like I've got something worth sharing through the medium of video. I'll put out something, but that's kind of the extent of it for the moment. Today I want to do a video about Windsurf and how I use it with voice prompting in order to work on coding projects. There's a lot of interest in Windsurf at the moment and the so-called agentic IDEs. IDEs, tools like VS Code, and with agentic, we're talking about bringing large language models directly into the IDE and prompting them for code gen. Now, a lot of people are interested in using this with their voice, which is what I want to do today. Personally, discovering the world of using voice for interacting with AI tools was really breakthrough for me, because you discover after a while that the models are getting so good that you can fit a lot of context into your prompt, and you don't necessarily need to keep prompts that short. The only issue is that it becomes very, very tedious if you're using these tools throughout the day to be typing long documents kind of all the time, right? It's just slow and you can only type so fast. So using tools like OpenAI Whisper is a great way of accelerating your work with generative AI. People mightn't think of coding as really involving that much writing besides actually writing the code. And the beauty of these tools, from my opinion, is that they create this bridge between natural language and code really for the first time. And that means that we can actually sort of use our voice to say, I want a UI that's going to look like this. I want this functionality. And it actually becomes a very kind of natural process to just literally sit back in a chair like I'm doing here with your microphone or whatever gear you have for recording your voice. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. And just literally, sometimes I close my eyes, just like envision, think about what you're doing. They call this vibe coding, or that terminology is catching on. Being the curmudgeon that I am, I have misgivings about the term, but it is certainly a really interesting workflow. And although I also have misgivings about Windsurf, we have seen some really dodgy reliability lately with Sonnet particularly, but overall, I think they're trying something big and it's a very good tool. So I try to give them a bit of grace, as it were, because this is a very new field and the world of agentic tools is just really kind of starting. So here's what I wanted to kind of show in this video. I want to quickly demonstrate, before we actually get into the voice mechanism here, just a model for the repository that I've been using for the past while. And I see folks kind of talking about it on Reddit a bit. People are very much developing their own hacks at the moment, as it were. And this is one that I do. I create a folder for my code base and I create a separate folder for my instructions. And this kind of gives me, I'm just going to move myself here into the center. This gives me kind of a mechanism for having a two-way interaction with AI tools. I can kind of tell it using a rules folder or just using manual prompting. This is a folder where you're going to put documentation telling me what you've done, and you can write a changelog. This is another one of my little hacks that I've kind of come up with. They are bringing online this feature for memories, but I find it just as effective to do this kind of, again, the hacky way. I create a little folder in my repository. Sometimes I call it for AI, and I'll create a subfolder called changelog, and I'll tell it, okay, I'm done for the day. I'm finished. I'm going to bed. Write out a changelog with today's date in that folder. And you don't need to tell it the time it actually works. I guess they have some method baked into this for, it knowing the time. But the other parts of my folder, this is just kind of a standard boilerplate that I've put up on GitHub for anyone who wants to copy the approach. I have a code base folder, which is where I put the code base, and an instructions folder just to keep everything kind of very separated at the top folder level. Within the instructions, I have what I call development prompts, which are the prompts that I'm going to write now, debugging prompts and editing prompts. So I keep my prompts version controlled and I keep them edited and I keep them separate. That's kind of important. And then as well as that, I'll kind of commonly set up a little structure along the lines of, I might have context, right? I'm going to just create a context folder here in this particular repository. And this is where people have been asking for docs, right? How do you, if you've been doing code generation with AI tools, you've probably seen frequently they use the wrong SDK. and what's the solution there. So what I'll do frequently is create a docs folder under context, and I'll actually just import. I have some common docs folders saved on my computer, and I'll just drop them in, and I'll literally reference that in context and say, this is the latest documentation. But there is a newer way you can do that because they're getting live web access. You can just create a file. I'm going to call one called Open Web UI, put that in docs, and then if I move myself away again, you can just write something like, please refer to the latest version of the Open Web UI docs available at, and then you can just provide a link, right, probably on GitHub somewhere, to the docs. And in my experience so far, this has actually worked. The agent Cascade mops up the context pretty well. It goes into it. It kind of has the intelligence to navigate through your folder structure. And that's why I found being very deterministic, to use that word, about how you label stuff actually makes a difference, because the robot, the agent, can actually read your file names and folder names and say, okay, this is where docs are. Okay, this is where Open Web UI is. Then read the file and then follow the link. So it's actually quite powerful if you can leverage your pedantry. If, like me, you're somewhat pedantic about how you label stuff, right? It actually can be an advantage using these tools. So use your neurotic personality to your advantage with these things. So that is just my folder structure, and as I said, it's on GitHub for anyone who wants to to use it for a template. But I'm going to show you now how I actually write one of these, what I call development prompts. So in instructions, I have a folder called dev prompt and instructions, and I'm going to just do one now. Before we do that, let me show you how to get this actually enabled. So because Codium and Windsurf is kind of downstream, I think it's a fork, right, of VS Code. So they use what's called the OpenVSX marketplace, which is a little bit different from, not always the extensions you can see on VS Code are there. But what you can do is, the one I use is called VS Speech, and it's by Microsoft, and it brings text to speech and speech to text into the IDE directly. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't work within the sidebar, right? Which would be tremendous. And I hope, and I'm confident that with the pace they're developing this tool, Windsurf will bring that online. So for the moment, this is why I use this particular workaround, right? I can't use it here, but I can use it here. The other thing to be aware of is just go into your settings in your extensions and make a couple of tweaks. It's worthwhile doing this. Once you have enabled the extension, type speech into your settings search bar, and then you'll be able to get a few settings for this tool, right? And the one that is useful is setting your speech language. And the other thing that's really worth doing is configuring a shortcut key for speech to text. If you start using these all the time, you're going to get sick of hitting a button to start and stop. So I use control and the plus sign on my keypad, and then you'll see once it becomes active, you're going to start seeing the transcription. So I'm actually working on, I want to make a utility for creating a folder structure that I'm using all the time for Windsurf. So I'm actually going to create now a dev prompt for that, just with my voice. So I'm going to call it, I think it doesn't really matter if you give it a title, it kind of just knows. But I use Markdown, and I use Markdown deliberately for sectioning up the prompt to make it clear. So I'm just going to start now, and I'm going to go totally freeform, and we will likely need to do some corrections, but just to demonstrate the idea. Develop a GUI for Linux that will use Python and PyQt5 or PyQt6. The functionality of the GUI will be to provide a quick and convenient interface for creating GitHub repositories that contain a specific file called .windsurfrules. Okay, I'm just going to stop it there because I don't want to get into too much detail on the prompt. This is only a demo. Now you can see that with speech to text, it's going to get some stuff right, some stuff wrong. It's not quite as good as Whisper, what it's using under the hood. But it usually does the job. The functionality, so this one actually is, it's now, you have to be careful because it needs to get this exactly correct. Specific file called .windsurfrules. So now that I have my prompt in order, there is one of two ways that I found that you can use this. Irrespective of which you use, I think it makes sense to keep it versioned in the repository because you can use it later or change to a different model, or if it's not working, you don't have to go to the trouble of rewriting your prompt. So I tend to just have them all the time here and version control them. Create the project, I don't need to actually speak this, I'm typing, in instructions.md, right? So now you can see that it's picking up the context, including my instructions folder, and I can just pass it like this. Now, the odd time it will get mistaken and say, oh, you want me to like work on the file, and you have to say, no, you want to develop this. So sometimes it's worth being explicit and saying, but I'm just going to say here, your task is to, just to make it very kind of a bit more instructional here. And you can use Markdown, as I said, to break it up a little bit, just to kind of make it easier to parse for the robot. Remember, you're writing for robot, right? And again, this is just a basic example, but if you have stuff like UI details, you might want to put those in a separate section to the main prompt. So now I'm just going to say create the project requested in this Markdown file. And now the magic as such happens, right? So it's actually read the Markdown file. It's analyzed it in sort of a lightning moment. And looking through the instructions, we can see it step by step. Now this is the thing, right? I created a blank task folder. So it's good always starting with a good repo. You can see it's also mopped up some context that we didn't really require. It's not a huge amount of tokens that's in the project, but you can actually use your Windsurf rules to kind of say, don't go into this folder unless I explicitly tell you to do so. And I could also have added to my system prompt the instruction like create it in the code base folder. Irrespective of all that, we can see it's actually already got underway. It's created the requirements.txt, and now it's asking for my permission to actually start building out the code, which it's begun populating into the SRC folder. As is standard for Python, and we can see it's got this Python program underway. So I'm going to just like stop it here because this is really only for a demo, and I'm going to work a bit more diligently on creating a viable prompt. But this is just to show you how you can use voice prompting and how you can use writing your prompts as Markdown files and providing those. And I use the same methodology for debugging, editing, where you can actually really take your time going through the first iteration, write down very, very detailed, very precise, exactly what's not working as expected, exactly what changes you want, save that in your repository, push that to GitHub. And this gives you flexibility, right? You can run the job later if you so please, or do it now. And it works quite reliably. I found this actually very effective. So that's my, those are my tricks for working with Windsurf IDE to date. Hope that was helpful. If you'd like to get more videos from me when I drop them over here on YouTube, do sign up. Thanks for watching.